Cool. So Lars contacted me about a collaboration. I don't know, about a year ago, a little less than a year ago. I'd published a piece that was a collaboration between Lars, Nora Khan, and DeForest Brown. And unfortunately, Nora and DeForest couldn't be here today, but that was a lot of fun. And since then, Lars and I have been in touch, and he gets in touch, and he says that he wants to sequence his genome. I should mention that when I'm not organizing conferences, I am a bioinformatician, so I do genomics research. And sorry, the computer's about to die. That's not the right one. I'm gonna keep talking, and yeah. That looks good. So yeah, I'm a bioinformatician. I do genomics research, so I know how to work with genomic data. My laboratory, I don't actually speak about this much in this particular context, but my laboratory does gene editing on human cells. So I work in a cancer research laboratory at Sloan Kettering, and the technology that we're developing is basically a modified white blood cell that we take from a patient, edit the genome of that white blood cell, reinsert it into the body, and it's now it has a new feature set where it's able to recognize antigens that it wouldn't otherwise recognize. So just brief aside, I have some familiarity with working with genomic data, and Lars and I also just get along, so we wanted to collaborate on this. So when Lars contacts me, the first thing that I tell him is that this is a bad idea. So he wants to get his, so I should mention, he wants to get his genome sequence, and then he wants to publish it in the public domain. And I tell him, you should maybe rethink this. And he's pretty adamant this is something that he wants to do. And I give him the advice that he should probably talk to his family members about this, because publishing your genome is publishing information not just about you, but about all of your relatives also. And the intention behind this project is, one, so that Lars can have some source material for his artistic practice, but that's secondary to a conversation that Lars has really been trying to open up about biometrics and personal information. So I'll let you maybe say a word about getting your genome sequenced, Lars.
Yeah, so I decided to, yeah, is it playing?
It's not playing.
This should be, it might appear something soon. So, it's...
No, I think it's just not playing here.
Ah, there we go.
There we go.
Press play.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
Now's the performance.
I decided that I wanted to get my genome sequenced, so I started to research like where you can get this done as a private person. Like there was a big problem of like, everyone was saying like, yeah, but you need to go to your doctor, you need to have a reason for doing this, like you can't just and first of all, I wanted to get my whole genome sequenced, and that's like a more expensive process, and it's also something that like they would just start to ask me questions about why I wanted it.
Not a 23andMe situation.
No.
This is a whole genome.
Not a 23andMe thing. So like I contacted like a lot of companies, but like they don't really do that to one individual often. Like they do it to like groups of individuals, or like they get the data from the doctors and then they like do it. And there's often a reason why you would want that. Like you have a disease or there's something that they consider like this is worthy enough to like send you to get your genome sequenced. So for me, it was actually really a difficult process to just even get it done, and I also wanted a really good price on it. So did research, and like US is one of the best places you can have it done. Secondary, it's like, but then I realized China is probably the best. So I contacted the BGI, Beijing Genomics Institute, and then they have been running since like 1999, and they have done a lot of projects that are both institutional, but they also have this like private section, and that the private section is what I wanted to sort of communicate with. So their price was really, really good, and it was so good that I could fly to Hong Kong and get it done there, because shipping my blood was so expensive that like it would be cheaper for me just to go there and like have the blood taken from me in Hong Kong and then have it sequenced. It was cheaper than the total price of sending it to, like, it was cheaper than the price in America, and it was cheaper than the price, like the shipping of the blood was something like $300-400, like, because you have to ship it.
Biohazardous.
Yeah, and it has to be shipped cold, basically with ice, so dry ice, so that's pretty pricey. So I went to Hong Kong and I got it sequenced. There was just like a business building, and I went to the top floor, and it was sort of strange. They had this like, it was mainly for like, I mean, first of all, I don't speak Chinese or anything, so I couldn't really understand everything there, but like, it was really a surreal experience, because they had these weird posters on the wall of like Angelina Jolie and her like adopted children, and they were doing, I think they were sending off data to BGI and other places for different reasons, like all the kind of uses you can do DNA sequencing for. So, but I got it done, and then later they also made a contract, and I made some changes to the contract, which said that they were allowed to use it for anything they want ever, because I would publish it in public domain anyway, so it didn't really matter.
Normally that'd be a red flag, but this.
So it was sort of like a MIT license on it, and I decided that I made them insert that in their contract that they already sent to me, also just like as an act, like an artistic act, just to say like, you do whatever you want with this. Of course, my genome is completely, personally, I believe it's pretty useless. But in the mass scale of their operation, it's completely useless. So, I don't know what they even thought when I wanted to do that change.
Maybe we should just say a word about how large BGI is. Yeah.
I don't know exactly the scale of it.
So it's the largest.
Yeah, it's the largest
genome sequencing organization in the world. And they have hundreds of genome sequencing machines.
Yeah, and they also actually produce machines, and they are partially state-owned and partially privatized. So it's like a really strange hybrid of a Chinese corporation. And I found that, first of all, for my project, that was sort of the perfect match, because I wanted to sort of insert myself into their weird operation. And their systems are also they have done some controversial projects in the past. And I wanted to sort of, just circulate in their databases, basically. So that's how that went about. And before that, I had to ask all my family members about it. I didn't go as far as to aunts and uncles and stuff, but I went to my sister. She was just going to have a baby, and I asked her about it. She said it was okay. My father said that my genome is completely useless, so I don't care if where it ends up. And it's only half of him, right? So it's not, or not even. So it's it doesn't really affect, he doesn't think it affects his life. And the rest were fine with it, so I sort of went along.
Yeah, so now that Lars has his genome sequenced, you had also been kind of meaning to release a record. So Lars makes music.
Yeah.
He's also kind of mixed media artist, kind of across every platform. So this is going to be a release. It's a collaboration between Avant.org, the organization that I run, and Pan Records. So we're gonna release something. I don't know if it's gonna be sound, but we're gonna release it on a record label. So now we have a context to just talk about this genome that we have. And I've had this on my desktop for a while, kind of tinkering with it. Before we kind of get into some of the things that we've been discussing, I just want to maybe say a little bit about Lars's practice. Like I said previously, Lars works across quite a bit of different, so music, visual practice. He has a visual practice, and there's quite a bit of kind of performative elements to his work. One of the kind of central themes in Lars's work, from my view, is access. So, and Lars kind of plays with this by incorporating personal information into the work that he does. So he'll do things like take his credit card number and his social security number and encrypt them, and then insert them into artworks, and use kind of his own biometrics to formulate as like source material for works. So the information is available, but or it's incorporated into the work, but it's not kind of immediately legible. The genome kind of functions in a similar way, where if you have the genome, maybe you have it on your computer, but do you know how to read it? Do you know what to do with it? So that's kind of the starting point for this project. And yeah, so when Lars and I kind of first started talking about this, one of the things that I was thinking about is your genome, so kind of in the terminology of cryptography, is your genome your public key or is it your private key? Is it something that is available to people? Is it something that you should be keeping safe in the way that we typically think about PHI, public health information? And I mean, that's kind of a tricky line. So we actually leave DNA everywhere. It's available, but it's not something that we don't typically think about that residue. So yeah, so the DNA that or our genetic material, our biometric information is kind of, it's all around us, it's omnipresent, but it's kind of in the form of like waste. So this is also something that Lars has kind of investigated through his aesthetic practice. Yeah, so do you want to pick up?
I want to say something about that. There's also this part of this as like, since it's sort of waste or residue of us, but the question also comes like who, like you say, who can access it? Who has the right to access that waste? And who has the right to sequence that waste and then use that data or build a database out of waste? So like you could say that somebody could start to collect waste on specific individuals and build a database out of that and sequence it as genomic data. What would that constitute in terms of like privacy, in terms of legal possibilities? And I mean, this is sort of where I'm publishing it like for free and like you can download it, but most individuals don't really, first of all, they don't really relate to DNA in this way, but they also don't, what would happen if someone would start to do that act of actually sequencing your DNA without your right? because that could happen.
So one thing we wanted to touch on is like what in the DNA is important for you to kind of conceal or to have private. So we share 99.9% of our DNA, but something in there is like the magic that we don't want revealed typically. So those kind of useful features are one, kind of underdetermined, and but there's a kind of visceral reaction to like having your DNA available for someone to then leverage. So there's something there, but it's unclear exactly what it is. So one of the things that we've kind of discussed at length is there's more information contained within it than we really have access to now. So there's this kind of notion of the future like attack vector, basically, where someone could potentially leverage your DNA for kind of malicious purposes, but we don't really know what that is yet. Or we might know the kind of vague, we might kind of have a vague idea of what that looks like, but it's not a reality at this point.
It's definitely not a reality, but like the fact that DNA research is drastically changing, or like drastically discovering new ways of using the data also. So there is like an increased sort of attack vector, and there's like actually now in like different conferences and stuff, it starts to come up as a subject on how to protect your DNA and how to sort of deal with the privacy around it, which is, I think it's going to be an increasing, like a topic that is going to be more and more actual, because we're starting, also the price, this is also a question of price again, like the price is drastically going down on like whole genome sequencing, so eventually it could be like a medical tool that is quite available to most people.
Yeah, so one little stat about that is the cost reduction in genome sequencing has outpaced Moore's law by several factors, basically. So the Human Genome Project was several $1 billion, I believe, and now you can get your genome sequenced for about $1,000. Lars's was a little bit more expensive, but that's the kind of like general zone that you're in. So, and that's within a decade. So, yeah, from 1 billion to 1,000. So that just changes the dynamics of like what's possible really significantly. So maybe one more note about that kind of that. So one thing that we were discussing beforehand is that having this genomic data available, but with this kind of unknown contingent attack surface in the near future, gives you this different kind of sense of history of what the genome represents. So there's this like potential for some kind of malicious activity, and you have to kind of take that into consideration when you're working with the data. So if you have your data available, you could potentially triangulate that with other social network data, other biometric data. All of that can be combined in order to identify and leverage that information.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're still really in the beginning of that, but there's already lots of startups that are working with that. Yeah, like some of the images you see are like from flyers and stuff I picked up and Christmas cards that BGI sent me. So, and also there's some letters in there from letters I had to sign as a corporation. They wanted to present me as a corporation to them for legal rights and stuff. So it was a strange process in general. But back to the topic, there's several different. I mean, since it's like there's a big private interest in building databases around DNA, like basically sequencing. So there is like, most of you probably know about 23andMe. I mean, their sort of sequencing is very, very basic.
They do genomic fingerprinting, so it's basically they have a panel of variants that that vary significantly in a population and are characteristic of certain traits or lineages.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of costs, I think, for them to expand into whole genome sequencing and continuing this database, and then also offering this data to other actors, like and to other private entities that could use this data for various purposes.
Yeah, you really don't want to read the 23andMe privacy policy. It's not going to be a fun read.
Or I mean, for me, it's but there's also this case of like building a building a data set or database on like data that might have way more value in the future. So like you're sort of building it on the idea that one day this will have way more value, and like most people are maybe not aware of that value, and therefore they don't treat their interaction with 23andMe in this valuable way. And this is sort of that's what most of these private entities that operates in this space benefits from. And they build their data sets now because, say, in 10 to 20 years, this data will be quite valuable and could be used for a lot of different use cases.
Yeah. So one kind of interesting anecdote, we were talking, kind of doing some prep for this, is if you kind of liken this process of collecting DNA in a public space to something like taking a photo. Like you can take a photo on a crowded street, and it has other people in it that contains visual information about them, and you can use it for certain things. Maybe it needs to be licensed for various reasons if you're selling, whatever. But what happens if you collect that information and then you collect things from a public space, collect DNA from a public space, and then sequence it and create a private database of that? Like, what is the kind of legal status of that if you're not doing anything with it, but you just have it?
And you have it for 20 years. And then you decide maybe to do something with it, or you find a reason to, like what was mentioned in the previous lecture, like you could correlate it with various types of data sets and so on, and you start to get interesting. There's a lot of also startups working on like using DNA for like advertisement and so on, and then of course this is really, really in the beginning, but there can be use cases like that, insurance, like, yeah, lots of different purposes. And like, for example, insurance is quite actual. Because, for example, in my case, there might be some genetic diseases in my family, and like if I publish my DNA, if the insurance can access this data, what will happen in terms of like the policy that I will be served?
Right. So, and this is basically 23's business model is selling your genomic information to people like insurance companies. It doesn't say that explicitly, it says third parties, but yeah. And so one of the reasons that this, I guess I should give a little bit of background about kind of how scientists understand a genome, which is so everyone has a different genome, presumably. Even twins will have variation in their genome. So there's a lot of variability within that 0.1%. And the way that we typically read that information is we use a reference sequence, which has been constructed by a team of scientists typically, which is basically a consensus model of what a genome should look like. Based, so 1,000 genomes is a project that makes available 1,000 genomes. There's various reference builds that try to update with the most likely base position, basically, what a normalized person would be. So, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the future of and the potentiality of kind of a collection of information. One of those is making a reference model.
One is making, but there's also this other part of one is making a reference model. And for example, there was recently a database released or a data set released of 500,000 genomes from the UK, which was quite extensive. And of course, all of this data is like anonymized, so you don't really know who it is. It's not in my case where you can actually take and pair it with my identity and my public persona. But these sort of releases, they have quite big impact on the science. And there has been discoveries out of these data sets already. So there's clearly that aspect of it that is, like the more sort of anonymized public data that gets released, there's also this aspect of like what happens in the future with these data sets if they can, for example, be correlated to other data sets or more public data sets. So it's also this question of like releasing anonymized data might not be in the future, like 10 years from now, might not be the best idea. Yeah, and we will touch into like in this idea of like releasing like anonymized data and data sets as a state also. You have this issue of like the state in some ways could correlate that data with other data if they have malicious intentions or that changes the state.
So the reference genomes are oftentimes kind of private-public ventures, but so they're state-funded oftentimes. So the reference genome kind of project, or there are projects. There's multiple initiatives to do this. Are state-run genome research platforms. So we've basically just been talking about kind of the state's role in management of genomic information.
Yeah, and in case of my data, it's now also sort of stored by the Chinese government. And I mean, it doesn't really relate to my life in any way, but it sort of changes my perspective on geopolitics in some ways, because you do have, they're trying to, like BGI tries to build the largest database in the world of genomic data, and they clearly see the value of that data, and they clearly want that data to have sort of, to use it for various purposes in the future. Like this is all sort of based on the idea that one day this data will be extremely valuable and we want to use it and have enough data at that point, or now, I mean.
Yeah, so the other kind of salient technology that comes into play here is gene editing technology, specifically CRISPR, which many of you have probably heard about, which basically makes it easy to make a specific edit to the genome. So we've been talking about kind of CRISPR technology with the backdrop of either private or governmental initiatives to amass a lot of genomic information. I don't want to give it away.
Yes, I mean, in that, even the BGI director said that he wanted to sequence the whole world. That's an official statement from him. And that sort of explains, I think, this sort of matching of like private interest, like as they offered me a service, like, and at the same time they have that interest of storing all the DNA or like all the genomic data of the world, from like sequencing a tree to sequencing a human. And I think there's clearly this geopolitical part of this, and US scientists has also started to come up with their own ways of dealing with this. For example, there was recently that some US scientists wanted to synthesize the human genome.
So basically what we want to kind of close with and open up for the audience is that the notion that gene editing and like the amassing of centralized databases of genomic information, and so the project to edit the human germline is in a way a feedback loop. You know, it's a social feedback loop where you now have this additional level of control over what a human is.
Yeah, and I think that most people should not do what I do. And I think you should, I mean, this project comes out of this concept of a data breach. So like say 23andMe builds a huge database. And in that database, suddenly somebody either managed to hack that database or it gets sold to a third party at some point because 23andMe cannot keep it up. Then there will be this moment where this database could eventually be used for other purposes than you contributed to, or even like you sort of agreed with with those terms, but you don't really know the consequences of this. So this project for me is also just about simulating a data breach in some form.
Yeah, the notion of the leak actually came up a couple times today, and one thing we've been kind of thinking about this project as a kind of controlled leak of Lars's genomic information.
Yeah, and I think we will see more leaks in the future. As like more people get sequenced, there will also be leaks at some point. Like at some point, some individual somewhere will have their medical data leaked. And this is sort of what I think we have to prepare ourselves and also like sort of work on the ethical aspects of this and also on the privacy aspects of it, is also define clearly where you place genomic data in public space.
Yeah, and it's kind of tricky to think about how we should move forward with this, because when you're starting to think about human germline modification, so there was a recent paper that came out that was kind of detailing the U.S. National Academy of Science and Engineering ethical congress that they convened on human germline modification, where the thesis of the conference, the kind of paper that they ended up writing, it advocated human germline modification. The reason being the availability or the availability of medical tourism is kind of or the inevitability of medical tourism is going to potentially drive people to travel outside the United States in order to get their baby's genome modified. So in order to have greater control over that process, you need to allow human germline modification. So, I mean, it's just kind of a tricky situation that you're placed in, trying to think about how to control this, you know?
Yeah, because it seems like we're reaching a state where it's almost like we're dealing with sort of data that we shed off all the time. And it's sort of a data that like seems extremely hard to control. And it can also be an extremely powerful tool to edit. And we're dealing with something that I think maybe we don't even understand, like how powerful it is. And we should really like consider this. And like what they're saying is basically we have to open up for this, because else people will go other places to do this. And that's sort of the, taking that line is kind of scary. Because it seems like they're just saying, okay, since they are doing it over there, we need to do it over here.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I think it's a good place to...
Yeah, you should download the release when it comes out.
Yeah, the album's going to be great.
It's very raw. And yeah, I mean, we're still in the research process of this, and there's a whole archive online where you can read all the research we're doing on Arena.
Yeah. For this talk, Lars generated something like 10,000 images that just fed some of its genomic information, the research archive that we have, and Lars has this kind of incredible Rube Goldberg machine of artificial intelligence algorithms that he's kind of feeding his private information, and that's what we've made available for you here today.
Yeah, so that's it, kind of. I just think that yeah, be careful with your data.
Don't do this.
Don't do this, and like, if you consider doing that, there is another. I found one other individual that recently released his genomic data, and there has been other people in history that like quite significant personas that did release their data.
Yeah.
So it seems to be not risky at this point. Like it seemed to be at this point in time. It doesn't seem like there's much risk to it. But like, let's see.
Thanks.
Yeah, fire. So we just didn't want to do questions in public, because people should have some drinks.
Well, are you all okay answering?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to lower the mics.
Do you need help?
Yeah, Jolie.
You need help? Okay.
So yeah, I asked.
All right. So Sam says that I'm wondering how decentralization could be made better. What I've seen is not necessarily better. Yeah.
Hey, so sorry, one last announcement. If you could avoid having drinks in the library, there's some very delicate material in there. Thank you very much. People in the library, please bring your drinks out.